What's up, everybody, and welcome to episode 181 of the Stand Up Guys podcast. I'm your host, the incomparable Zach Jones, joined as always by the man who put his sandworm in your popcorn bucket, the phenomenal AJ Singh.
What's up, everybody?
Hey, AJ. This will be our review of Dune Part Two. A lot of people are probably saying, well, maybe I already saw Dune Part 2. Why would I watch these guys review? I'll tell you why. Because, AJ, for anyone who hasn't watched our reviews, we're not only going to do, we'll do a short, spoiler-free review of the film. But then, unlike your other review sites, we're actually going to do a deep dive, scene-by-scene, spoiler review and analysis of the film. But yeah, off the top, let's go into spoiler free. AJ, I'm actually pretty interested to know your thoughts on this film because I remember when we reviewed Dune Part One, I liked it quite a bit more than you did. I think you thought it was okay, but it kind of slow and bored you a little bit. Did Dune Part Two win you over?
Big time.
Oh, nice.
I am a fan of this movie. It was I think part of it was maybe that I went into it with low expectations because the first one I wasn't a big fan of. But this was day and night compared to that movie. So yeah, this was what I was hoping for.
Yeah, I think what this movie showed is Dune Part One was really did a lot of ground building and world building and is seeding. It set up so that this movie could pay off. I feel
Right.
like, and I feel like this movie did pay off quite well. I ended up liking this quite a bit, and I did enjoy it more than the first film. I'll say for me, what I like about this is I think my favorite type of film in that it's the kind of film you don't see often, which is like a big budget movie that's doesn't like ask you to turn your brain off. Like I feel like most movies are either like the big kind of actiony popcorn flick, or like an Oscar-y type movie which might have like smarter themes and like dialogue depth that you like, but then isn't very visually appealing and not something you'll necessarily go back to. Like a lot of Oscar-y type films are like one and done. Like, yeah, I watched it, I can appreciate it, but it's not really anything I'll go back to. And I think there's, a film like this. I think Denis Villeneuve, who directed this. I think Christopher Nolan. There's a couple directors that for some reason get away with making movies like this that are both kind of epic in scope, cinematic looking, but still smart and still have like, really interesting themes worth exploring that make you think. I'll say one thing because I've never read the Dune books or any Dune related stuff. So my frame of reference really is just these movies. What I liked about this movie is it really did explore how religion is almost used as a weapon. It's used both to gain political influence and as a system of control for poor people and people who are really devoid of hope, desperate. Yeah. Yes. And I just thought, for a big budget movie to have these themes of like, being critical of religion, I was like, wow, this is really something. I don't know what you thought of that.
No, I definitely thought there was a like some commentary about that, like hidden within, and I mean not really hidden, but I mean I think it's based on like history, like what we've seen with like religions and how they've been used as political tools and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the closest parallel for this movie would definitely be the Middle East, just because you also got the whole spice connection where it's like, oh, there's this thing they have in their desert. It's very valuable. Everybody wants it. Of course, in our world, it's oil, but like, but I think the religious themes go beyond the Middle East. It can be applied to, basically
Yeah,
every religion, and
right.
how they worm their way into politics, and make people vote against their own self interests, and things of that nature. So I really liked it. The themes explored in this movie.
Yeah, I
Um,
appreciate it.
AJ, any criticisms of the film?
I can't really think of them right now. I just watched it last night, and it was such a positive experience for me. I think I just came out of it with like maybe a recency bias, but I can't really think of anything that I didn't like about this movie.
Yeah, I don't have any major criticisms. When we get into spoilers, there's like one scene where I'm like, well, and out of like I'm not sure the runtime. It's got to be what, close to a 3 hour movie,
Yeah.
and there was one scene where I'm like, I don't know if this totally made sense to me, which I'll get to in spoilers.
Hmm.
Um, the only other thing I'll say is, and I can't quite put my finger on it. See, one of the things, and it's a plus and minus thing, where like one thing I found interesting about um, the movie is that our main characters, it's almost like Breaking Bad, where they start to do some unsavory things in the movie, like especially both Paul Atreides and his mother.
Hmm.
You're watching them kind of take, in a way, like a heel turn. I mean, or at least do some very morally gray things, which I like complex characters like that, and morally gray characters that aren't completely, right. But at the same time, if I had one criticism, I think even though that makes them interesting, I think most of the characters in this movie come off as kind of cold and calculating. So I don't necessarily get like emotionally invested in them as I do characters in other films. Like, I don't think there was any points in this movie where I got like, you know, uh, I don't know, just like super emotional. I think that, like, the one character in the movie that's kind of tries to be that that character you sympathize with more is Zendaya's character,
Right.
Chani.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you get a little bit of that, but yeah, again, these are nitpicks. I really do like this movie. It's just like when I think of the characters in this movie, like most of them are in some way or another kind of cold and calculating, not
Hmm.
super warm characters. I don't know if you would agree with that or not.
Yeah, I do agree. Yeah, but except for that one guy who's a big fan of Atreides, like he's like his number one supporter. He's like,
Oh,
you know that.
Stilgar, played by Javier Bardem,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So he seems like he's kind of a warm character to me, but other than that, yeah, everybody else seems cold.
And even he is like, he's a religious fundamentalist, and like
Yeah.
he is willing to kill people for not much, you
Right.
know,
Right.
um, and so like he definitely, I think, provides probably the most comic relief in the movie.
Yeah.
I do like, there's several points uh, during the movie where um, like, because they have this whole prophecy, and like he'll, like, something will happen with Paul and it'll be like, see the prophecy. But then
Hmm.
sometimes, like, I don't have a specific example, but I believe there's times when like things don't exactly happen exactly like the prophecy, but you'll kind of see him interpret it that way,
Right.
so that it
Yeah.
coincides with what he wants to believe.
Right.
And I'm like, that's exactly what happens in real life as
True.
well with
Mhm.
religious people. So I like that as well. So yeah, this movie was just really enjoyable to me. Um, I mean, AJ, I think I know what your answer is going to be. It's going to be the same as mine. So we usually in the spoiler free zone will say, do we recommend seeing this in theaters, waiting for streaming, or not watching at all? I mean, it's got to be seen in theaters, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, just so many great visuals in this film too.
And like, yeah, you kind of have to see like there's certain like huge kind of like action part scenes and stuff that I just feel like are way better on the big screen.
Yeah, same. Oh, that does bring up one other small criticism I have, and it's uh, is the score of the movie is by Hans Zimmer, who I love, and it's
Mhm.
a good score. But I will say at times it is very noisy, and there's
Mhm.
almost I think there was times at the movie where it was like, okay, I think we could use a little more silence.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the movie, I wasn't used to like I haven't gone to the movies in a while, and everything I watch at home is on very low volume. So there was a point in the movie where I felt like I actually like teleported back home in my mind, and I was like, we gotta turn down the volume on this thing.
Right. I know. I feel like an old man sometimes in the theater where I'm like, it's a little too loud.
Yeah,
Maybe turn it down a notch.
right.
But yeah, again, my criticisms of this movie are pretty light because
Yeah.
yeah, pretty good.
Mhm.
AJ, do you want to talk about you know uh, any of the performances or anything before we move on to spoilers?
I've never seen Timothy Chalamet before in anything. I liked his character. I
Well,
think he played it
besides Dune
well.
Part One, of course.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that movie they were all kind of like stoic, and he didn't have the of course he didn't have the range and emotion that he had in this one. I felt like anyway. This one I could see his transformation throughout the movie. Um, his acting changed. Like at the beginning he was more docile and passive, and he changes his whole entire behavior, and that was good. I think he played it well. Zendaya, I thought was really good. I haven't seen her in a lot of stuff either, except the first movie. And and Spider Man. Yeah,
Yeah, the Spider-Man
she's
films.
not bad. She's not a bad actress actually.
Yeah, she's good.
Um, Javier Bardem, he played his part really well. I think he might have been my favorite in this whole movie when it came to acting. So, and the bad guy, like the new bad guy who's introduced in this movie,
Oh
he was
yeah,
pretty good too. He was really
uh,
good. I liked him.
yeah. Fade Rotha, played by Austin
Right,
Butler. Yeah,
right,
yeah. Did a good job of like making him like seem like a scary psychopath.
right. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think the performances all around were pretty good. I can't really say anybody wasn't bringing their A game. So,
Right.
um, all right, AJ, should we get to the fun part? Should we get to spoiler country?
Let's do it.
All right. So these are all taken from my memory, AJ, and I saw the movie about 5 days ago. You just saw it last night, so like, feel free to jump in because I'm sure like this is a movie. I'm sure I didn't hit
It's a long one.
everything, but
Yeah.
I think I got quite a bit. So, um, first of all, we open up and there's a quote uh, on the in I don't know if it's like the Fremen language or what, but it and I forget exactly what it says, but it says I think it says something about like whoever controls the spice controls the power, something like
Hmm.
that. So that's before like the movie even kicks off. So then I believe we open. We're introduced to Princess Irulan, played by Florence Pugh, and she's
Hmm.
basically quickly recapping the events of the first movie and how her father, the Emperor, played by oh, what's his name, Christopher Walken,
Christopher Walken.
yeah,
Mhm.
he helped wipe out House Atreides in the first film. He basically gave support to the Harkonnens to do that, which is something um, he wasn't supposed to do as the emperor. So, like, if the other houses found out, it would be an issue for him, which will
Yeah.
actually come up in this. Now, AJ, I'm curious. Have you seen the first Dune since we watched it for the
No,
podcast?
I was dreading watching any more movies from Dune because I just felt like it was so slow, and so I was very turned off. I didn't watch it again.
Well, I got to be honest. Like, I wasn't going to, but then like I heard a review that said like they don't do much of a recap of the first movie,
Hmm.
and then I noticed it went on sale digitally for like really cheap. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I will rewatch it, and I did, and I'm kind of glad I did because I did forget some things, but they
Yeah.
do, like I said, they do a little bit of catch up here in the beginning. Um, we also see that Robin, or maybe it's Raven, the big guy played by Dave Bautista. Um,
Mm.
he, after the events of the first movie, is basically put in charge of Arrakis by Baron Harkonnen. I wrote, we get several views of Paul's unborn sister in the womb. These happen
Right.
actually several times throughout the film, and
Hmm.
like I can't remember quite like all the dialogue that goes like over top of these. Like in the beginning, I think Florence Pugh's character is still talking. I want to say there's a scene where like Paul is narrating and he says like, you know, I hope to have everything like ready by the time you were born, but I didn't or
Hmm.
something along those lines. But yeah, they do go back to that quite a bit, don't they? Where you see like her in the womb.
Oh, they constantly go back to that. Yeah,
Yeah,
it becomes like a kind of a main plot line too at some point,
yeah.
like a side plot line. Yeah.
Let me ask you this again. I have never read the Dune books. There's several times in this movie where like Lady Jessica, who's Paul's mother, like he'll tell her like, "Oh, I can hear your sister talking to me," and like a part
Hmm.
of me is like, do you think that's real? Like, because like there are like magical witch powers kind of in this
Yeah,
universe. So I'm like, do you think like the unborn daughter is like, you know, some sort of like, you know, witch who is actually conveying thoughts to her?
yeah, I do because like at some point later, Paul has that same kind of experience. Like he has a premonition,
Right.
and like it carries on with the same theme of like you know it. Yeah, it feels like there's definitely some sort of a storyline there that's going to continue.
Yeah, and from what I understand, they are planning to do a Dune Part Three.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know when that will be because I believe it's my understanding that one of the prominent Dune books, like there is like a large time jump where maybe
Mhm.
like the sister is older. So like I don't know if it would be something they would do right away or maybe if it's something they would wait several years to do. But I think they are
Right.
making a Dune Part Three.
Mhm.
Um, so uh, Paul and the Fremen are lying quietly on a hillside. Um, they're hiding from the Harkonnens, and as the Harkonnens get close, Paul and his mother go and hide behind some rocks. One of the soldiers gets close to them, but they leave when they hear a thumper because, like, I believe Stilgar or one of the other ones with them, like, set up a thumper to attract
Mhm.
a sandworm.
Mhm.
So the Harkonnens silently fly to the top of a hill and shoot the
I thought this
thumper.
was cool.
I did too.
I thought
I
this was fun.
I kind of like how they
Yeah.
don't have like jetpacks or anything, but whatever they have some sort of technology there that lets them just like silently float. And I'm like,
Yeah.
there's something kind of cool and menacing about
Right.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's less obvious. It's better for an invasion, really, because you're not just flying straight up and like easy to see. Like you're kind of like climbing slowly and close to these rocks. It's like,
yeah, it's
yeah, you're
cool.
floating up against. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool too. So yeah,
Mhm.
they fly up there, and one of the guys shoots the thumper and explodes it. Um, but then after that, the Harkonnens they all start getting sniped by the Fremen, and several of them fall dead, like off the cliff, and several of them land like right next to Paul and his mother. A soldier flies down next to Paul, and he sees Paul. Paul is able to take a knife off one of the other dead soldiers and kill that guy. But then
Hmm.
he's almost shot by another guy, but luckily his mother's there and she like hits that guy with a rock and saves him.
Yeah.
So basically, the Fremen win this battle. All the Harkonnen are dead. So Stilgar and the Fremen drain the water from all of the dead Harkonnens, like out of their suits.
Hmm.
Now, in the first movie, we learned that these still suits they wear basically recycles like all of their sweat back into like drinking water.
Hmm.
So, do you think that's what this is like when they drain the water from these? Is this just like these guys just like sweat?
No, I think it's like the fluids from their actual bodies. Like I think they they filter out like all the blood and guts and everything.
So
And like
that's what I was wondering because like it's not blood colored, like it's clear. So is there some sort of like filtration thing that just like
it seems so, yeah.
okay? Because yeah, I was like, are they just getting their sweat? Because it seems like a lot of liquid. So like yeah, that's what my thought was too. They got to be taking their blood somehow, right?
Yeah.
Um, Stilgar says like that water they're getting from them is like tainted water, but they can still use it in their cooling systems.
Hmm.
Um, so at the end of Dune Part One, the way Paul gets into the Fremen is by trial by combat, where this other guy named Jamin or Jamin, they got in a fight. He killed Jamin, so that's how he got accepted into the Fremen. But they're carrying Jamin's body. It's all like wrapped up.
Hmm.
So Paul agrees to help carry Jamin's body back.
He insists on carrying his body.
Right.
Hmm.
And also, I thought this was cool. Is they set up a thumper by all the dead bodies so that the sandworm will come up and eat all the bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they get back to the Fremen's cave, and they're met by a mix of Fremen people. Some of these Fremen people absolutely hate Paul and his mother. They refer
Yeah.
to Paul as a spy, and they refer to her as a witch. But there's also some true believer religious people who believe Paul is like a messiah, and so they're kind of like praising Paul. So um,
Yeah, I think the religious people are the ones who are like from further south
yeah, yeah,
because apparently that's where the fervor is strong. Like, yeah.
yeah. They'll get that into that a little more in a bit, but yeah, you're right.
Mhm.
Um, so they also drain the water from Jamin's body, and they dump it into this large, like sacred pond of water, where that's what they
Yeah.
do with all their dead. And
Mhm.
Stilgar basically tells Jessica that the Fremen would die of thirst before drinking from like this sacred pond of water.
Yeah.
This story causes Jessica to cry, and Stilgar like wipes her tear and like drinks it. He's like, "Don't waste your water," which this is like a big thing in this movie, which I find a little bit silly. There was even a scene I forgot earlier where because she's like pregnant, so she's a little sick, and like she's
Mhm.
about to throw up, and he's like, "No, no, don't throw up, don't waste your water," and like, of course, she does anyway. But
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
I'm like, come on, like, are you telling me these guys never throw up? Like, you're living in terrible
Right.
conditions, and you're telling me they never throw up?
Also, he drank that tear, and tears are salty as hell.
Right?
Aren't you getting more dehydrated with that? Like,
He would be, yeah. I also
yeah.
remember there's a scene in the first movie where like he spits at the ground of Paul's dad, but then he's like, "Oh, that's a sign of respect because you're like sharing your moisture." So they make
Oh,
like a big
okay.
thing of like this.
Oh, good.
Um, so Stilgar tells Lady Jessica that their Reverend Mother is dying, and he wants her to take her place. Um, and she's like, "Well, what if I refuse?" And he's basically like, "Well, then we have no use of you, and we'll kill you." So she basically doesn't
Hmm.
really have a choice in the matter.
You're right. Yeah.
So Jessica tells Paul that she will have to go through a painful ritual where she will gain all of the past knowledge of all the prior Reverend Mothers. So Paul and all the others wait outside the cave while the ritual is performed. And so, just like you were talking about, we find out that Chani is from the northern Fremen. She thinks the whole prophecy is bullcrap,
Hmm.
as most of the northern Fremen do. But Stilgar and people from southern Arrakis are fundamentalists who believe in the prophecy big time. So I
Hmm.
found that interesting. I like that how they have the two groups of people, the fundamentalists and like the true believers, and then the people
Yeah,
that
yeah,
are skeptics.
yeah.
um, so it turns out that in the ritual, Jessica gets poisoned with a blue poison called the Water of Life. Later
Hmm.
on, we'll find out how they get that substance. Um, like the Reverend Mother and the other like women are shocked to find out that Jessica is pregnant and that she survives the poisoning. My thing is like, because to me it did seem like they thought she was going to die. So a part of me
Yeah.
is like, were they disappointed that she lived? Like I couldn't quite tell.
I think they were surprised that she lived because she went through all that like seizure type behavior. She looked like she was about to die, and then she lived. And I think it was just like surprising. And plus, she's an outsider, so maybe they thought like, "There's no way she's likely to survive this." So.
Um, so Stilgar thinks her survival is a sign of the prophecy being true, but Chani disagrees. Paul says Chani is right. He says he's no messiah, but he will fight for the Fremen and basically wants to become one of them. He says his
Hmm.
mom survived because of her Bene Gesserit training, allowed her to, I believe, like convert the poison into waters. He says something like her training allowed her to basically mitigate the effects of the poison.
Right.
So now Paul has a scene where he talks to his mom. She now has the blue eyes of the Fremen after
Hmm.
going through this ritual. I wrote, she seems a little crazy, and she tells Paul that he should take the poison as well. Um,
Yeah, she does seem crazy. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. This definitely had like a weird effect on her.
Yeah.
So Stilgar sends Paul on like a training mission where he has to walk across a worm-infested crossing to prove himself. Um, and some of the other people are taking bets on like how long he'll live. Like some of them say like he's going to die immediately. I think some say like, oh, he might last like 6 months or something, like that.
Hmm.
But so Chani follows him. She makes fun of his sand walk, and she teaches him how to do it properly. She also teaches him how to collect moisture using some sort of like moisture catching device.
Hmm.
And in this scene, we can kind of tell, like, Paul keeps staring at her, so we can tell that Paul likes her.
Yeah.
So now we get a scene with the bad guys where they're kind of monitoring the planet and the spice production. And Rabin asked he asked one of his men why they only control the northern half of Arrakis. The man says the south is too dangerous and inhospitable because of all the Fremen. So Rabin
Hmm.
kills him and says that they need to kill all of the Fremen, who he refers to as rats. And he basically just like slams this guy's head like repeatedly into the screen.
Yeah.
And I gotta
Yeah.
say, both him and later on the Austin Butler's character, like they treat the help really poorly. Like they'll just kill them indiscriminately for nothing.
Yeah. They do. They do. I mean, I guess that's the whole like because also there's a scene like where you hear screaming from women uh with the older Harkonnen guy, the leader of the family. So I mean, I think they're all just like that. It's just the Harkonnen thing to do.
Oh yeah, that's actually a scene I missed. I forget exactly where that happens, but you're right. At one time, like they go into where the Baron is taking his like mud baths or whatever, and
Yeah,
there's like
yeah,
some dead slave girls in there too.
yeah.
So yeah,
Mhm.
they're not good to the hired help.
No.
Um, okay, so here we get an action scene which I like, but when I get to the end of it, I have a little logic problem with it. So we
Mhm.
basically see all these like breathing tubes poking out of the sand,
Yeah.
and then a large spice harvester lands, and so the Fremen are using those tubes to breathe while they're hiding in the sand. So they all
Yeah.
come out and they physically attack a bunch of the Harkonnen guys that are
Mhm.
guarding the spice harvester. And there's one of those what they call an ornithopter, dragonfly style helicopter circling, and it
Yeah.
has a big old machine gun on it. So they kill a bunch of the Fremen with the machine gun,
Mhm.
and so we get the scene where Paul, like the Thopter has a shield on it, so Paul distracts the Thopter and gets it to shoot at him, and this gives Chani a chance to shoot an RPG shell like into it while the shield's like kind of down or whatever, and
Mhm.
causes it to explode.
Yeah.
But then, so the Fremen, they have like these lasers that basically destroy everything in their path, and so they use
Mhm.
these lasers to just like blow up the harvester and wreck shop. And so here's my logic problem: is why didn't they just use those lasers to begin with? That seemed like their best
Right.
weapon.
No, they have some serious weaponry. Like they're able to go toe to toe with the like a galactic empire. And they I don't know if they ever showed like how they're able to harvest this technology, like how they do it, like because that takes a lot of like technical skill. Like you need a lot of knowledge to develop that kind of technology.
I mean, the only thing I can think of why they would not have used those lasers to begin with is if it's like for
Mhm.
some reason they couldn't get through the shield on the helicopter. But then I'm like, if that's true, why wouldn't these guys somehow like invest in a shield that would protect the whole sand harvester? So
It's true, yeah,
I don't know. A part of that made me be like, I like that whole action scene. It was really good. But I'm like,
yeah,
man, they should have like dug out those lasers, those death lasers to begin with.
right, right,
So the Fremen celebrate their victory. Um, Stilgar wants to give Paul a proper Fremen name. So he chooses the name Usul, which means the strength at the base of the pillar.
hmm
He then asks Paul to choose a warrior name, and Paul chooses the kangaroo mouse that was in the desert earlier, which are these little like mice with like these large ears, and they can somehow
yeah,
like um, their ears collect moisture that they can then drink, so they're like these kind of self-sustaining creatures.
hmm
And apparently, those kangaroo mouse and Fremen are known as the Muad'Dib. So now Paul's like full Fremen name is Paul Muad'Dib Usul.
okay,
A real mouthful.
right,
So now we get a scene where Paul sits on top of a sand dune with Chani. He asked her what her Fremen name is. I couldn't remember what exactly she said, but
no, I can't
it
remember.
basically translates to desert spring,
Yeah,
which will come into play later.
hmm
Stilgar rides by on a sandworm, and Paul says he hopes to learn that one day. Hopes that he'll Stilgar will teach him. Now I think Chani has a line here where like she's like, "Well, you're not like the other Fremen, so that probably won't happen," or something. And then a couple scenes later, he's literally like learning to do it.
right, yeah.
But yeah, Chani says something to the effect of like, "The others will always think of you as an outsider," and I think Paul asks her like what she thinks. I forget the exact conversation here, but basically they end up kissing. They find out that
She says that he could become a real Fremen. Like she comes kind of like she meets him halfway, I guess.
okay, but yeah, that leads to them kissing.
Mhm.
So we get a scene with Lady Jessica where she holds her pregnant stomach, and she thinks to herself that she needs to get people to believe that Paul is the Messiah. And to do that, and I forget exactly what her line in her head here was, but it was very devious. She was basically like, we need to prey on like the fearful and the desperate, and then go.
Yeah, the weak
Yeah,
ones.
the weaklings, and then go south where like all the fundamentalists live, and basically like
Yeah.
convince them, take advantage of them too. So
Hmm.
her character after drinking the blue water like really changes pretty drastically.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, like, what was the mother before her like? Was she also like that, like, because of the knowledge that she had from centuries before? Like, was she also like a planner and devious like that? Like, they don't show what happened with her, but I mean, they make it seem like if you drink the blue water, then you become like kind of like corrupted or something like that, you know?
Yeah, and I mean we'll get to it later on, but like eventually Paul is going to drink the blue water too and get seemingly corrupted, and so it is one of these things where I'm like, were they already headed on a path, and the blue water only like kind of uh, you know, made that exponential, or is there really something in the blue water that's and all this past knowledge that's like dramatically changing them for the worse? I'm
Right.
not
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure, because both Paul and his mother, at least in the first movie and the beginnings of this movie, seemed like pretty decent people, and they really didn't
Hmm.
start making like the really questionable choices seemingly until after the
Right.
blue water. So it's interesting, and I'm not quite sure what the answer is.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, so now Stilgar gives Paul the equipment to call and ride a worm, and I remember he tells Paul not to do anything too flashy, and Paul agrees to that.
Hmm.
Um, so Paul uses a thumper and ends up attracting a grandfather worm, which is one of the biggest worms there is, and successfully rides him. And a part of me was like, because I think there's a scene where Stilgar's like, oh, uh, you know, why did he call such a big worm or something? But he doesn't really have power over that, right? It's just kind of random as to what worm's closest, right?
It seems like it, yeah. But I guess in Stilgar's mind, it's part of a prophecy. You know, he got the big one, so.
I guess so.
Mm,
But yeah, he calls it and he successfully rides the worm. So yeah, this causes Stilgar and many of the others in the group to believe that Paul is indeed the Messiah.
yeah.
Back inside, a woman tells Jessica what Paul did, and she's basically, well, go spread the word, because she does want everyone to think Paul's the Messiah. So she's like, yeah, tell everybody of this deed that he completed.
Yeah.
And also, I remember there was a mural on the wall in that room of like a guy riding a big sandworm that was like part of the prophecy. So like this does like
Yeah.
fit into the prophecy.
Hmm.
um so there's a scene um where Paul is with Chani in a tent. He has a nightmare, and she asks what it was, and he says he sees himself following a female figure in the south, which leads to a terrible holy war. So this
Hmm.
makes Paul not want to go to the south.
Yeah.
um Chani asks if Paul loves her, and he says he will as long as he is breathing.
Hmm.
So now we get a montage of Paul and the Fremen taking down different spice farming operations. Again, like pulling out the lasers and everything, and you just kind of see a montage of a bunch of stuff getting destroyed. And you
Hmm.
also kind of see Paul's eyes turn the blue Fremen color as well.
Right.
So now we get a scene where Jessica tries to get Paul to come with her to the south, with her and Stilgar, but of course he refuses because he saw that visions, and like he's like, no, I don't want to go to the south.
Yeah.
Um,
He's afraid of billions of people dying if he starts the holy war.
right now in that same scene, like he sees the vision again, but more clearly, and the woman who
Hmm.
he was following was his mother, was Jessica.
Yeah.
And I don't remember his exact dialogue in that scene, but I remember he kind of yells at her, like before he
Yeah.
leaves, like he's kind of angry with her.
Mhm.
So now we see like a huge spice refinery, and we just see it like explode like into a huge
Mhm.
fireball. Like they take out this huge refinery.
Yeah.
So then this causes a scene to go back to the bad guys. So now Robin, Dave Bautista's character, he's like super pissed off. So he's like, "We're flying out. We're taking care of these guys. We're taking care of the problem." So they get all
Mhm.
their um, choppers together and they go out. So they land and they get out, and like basically the Fremen are really like taking them out. Like they're like they're almost like the Flash, almost like they run in and they just like kill a guy and run
Yeah.
out, and like a
Yeah.
bunch of guys start getting taken out. When Rabin sees Paul in the distance, he starts like running like a little bitch, like
Yeah.
he's like
Yeah.
I'm gonna die, so he starts running, which I thought was kind of
He's
funny.
all talk, this guy.
Right.
Yeah.
So Paul pursues him, and they end up jumping on the back of an ornithopter. Now this is another thing I question. So Paul gets knocked off, and he falls such a distance, and it eventually I think cuts away. But I'm like, I think he would be dead. Like it seemed like a long fall.
So like, okay, so the way I interpreted that scene was that Paul was chasing him, but he didn't catch up to him. It was somebody else who got on that ship with him.
Oh, was that a different guy?
It might have been a different person who like snuck on there and fought him, but I don't know for sure.
That would make more sense because I thought it was Paul, but then like the guy got knocked off of there, and it was such a distance. I'm like, man, if that's Paul, man, he
Yeah.
can take a hit.
Right.
Um,
Sand is soft, but it ain't that soft.
um, okay, so now we get a scene with Princess Irulan. That's Florence Pugh's character. She
Mhm.
confronts her Reverend Mother about Paul possibly being alive. And the Reverend Mother basically admits to being behind the murder of House Atreides. So she basically used her political influence to get the Emperor to kill Paul's family, his father, and
Mhm.
everything. And she says, even if Paul's alive, basically the leader of Arrakis must be someone they can control. And she suggests Fade Rotha, the nephew of the Baron. And the
Mhm.
princess even mentions, like, he's a psychopath, but the Reverend Mother's like, yeah, maybe, but, we can control him. So, he's better to put in place. So we are indeed introduced to Fade, who is a psychopath. And we kind of referenced this earlier. Like he kills like two of his servants just to test the sharpness of his sword blade. So you can see this
Yeah.
guy again, like seemingly all these Harkonnen guys. He doesn't care about life, and
Mhm.
you know. Um. So in a black and white sequence, I thought this. I don't know exactly why he made the decision to go black and white here, but it had a good effect. I thought this
Mhm.
whole gladiator fight scene. So in a black and white sequence, Fade fights three of the last survivors of House Atreides. While doing this, he is being observed by Lady Margot Fenring, a member of the Bene Gesserit.
Mhm.
So the other fighters are all supposed to be drugged to make the fight really
Yeah.
easy on him, but the
Right.
Baron leaves one of the men undrugged to test Fade. So he kills the drug guys like really easy, and then on the third
Mhm.
guy, once he finds out he's undrugged, he actually turns off his protective shield, um, and he fights this guy and ends up killing him. One thing I thought that was weird though is in this fight they basically had like other guys like helping Fade, like they were circling.
Yeah, it wasn't a fair fight
Yeah, I
anyway.
was like, how lopsided does this fight need to be? Like, it's like if you're trying to put this guy over with the crowd, like you don't it's like a weird, like almost wrestling booking thing where if you wanted the crowd to cheer for a guy, like you wouldn't have somebody cheat on his behalf. You know what I mean?
Right,
So
right.
that I thought
And like
was weird.
the guy he was fighting was already tortured for so long. He was already kind of like, not well.
Right, right. Yeah, all these guys were in bad shape. Even if they weren't drugged, like they weren't in good shape.
Right. Yeah.
So now there's a scene between Fade and the Baron. He tells the Baron that he should kill him for, leaving that guy undrugged.
Mhm.
But the Baron says he'll make it up to him by making him leader of Arrakis.
Mhm.
So now we get a scene where, like, wherever they are, they're all celebrating. Fade is followed by Lady Margot Fenring, who seduces Fade, and she gives him the same test that Paul took in the first movie, where he's got to put his hand in the box that like gives him like severe pain.
Right, right.
Um, and then we get a scene where Lady Margot Fenring reports back to the princess and the Reverend Mother. She says that Fade can. I believe her line was something like, "He can be controlled through sex and humiliation." So whatever that means.
Yeah, the humiliation part didn't make sense to me. I didn't get that, but
I mean, I
yeah.
think she's got to be saying because they had sex because like she reveals like she got pregnant with his child.
Yeah.
So
That was fast, by the way.
right, it was. Um,
Yeah. She must have used her witch powers on that. I don't know.
yeah, that's one thing about these Bene Gesserit is like they all kind of have these mysterious like powers, and you don't really know all what they can do.
Yeah.
But like, I
Right.
think the implication there is like he must like to be degraded in some way when they have sex, like he likes to be humiliated in some sort of like S and
Yeah,
M,
like masochist.
yeah, some sort of
Yeah.
like thing like that.
Mhm.
So now we find out that Gurney Halleck, who is Josh Brolin's character from the first movie, he became a smuggler after the events of the first movie, and he basically works as protection for an independent spice harvester.
Mhm.
So when the Fremen attack the harvester, Paul recognizes Gurney's footsteps and spares his
Mhm.
life. And that was also a reference to the first movie. They have this whole thing in the first movie where it's like, I can recognize your footsteps, old man. But I'm like, really?
Oh,
Are his footsteps
yeah.
that distinct from everybody else's?
Right. That's never been a thing for anybody.
Right. So that's a bit silly, but I was like, okay, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
So they're all happy to see each other and they can hug each other.
Even though he destroyed his entire like fleet, like
Oh,
the Freeman like
right.
destroyed
They destroyed
everything.
that independent, like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so Paul takes Gurney back to his group. Chani is very dubious of him and his influence over Paul.
Mhm.
Gurney tells Paul that he should go south and get all the fundamentalists to fight for him, but Paul refuses because he saw those visions.
Mhm.
Gurney says, well, in that case, you're going to need firepower, and that he knows where his father's hidden nukes are on
Mm.
Arrakis.
Okay, that kind of answers my first question. Then, yeah, they got weaponry from like a cache, I guess.
Yeah, well, the only thing is, we find out here in just a little bit that the nukes, at least, were behind like a DNA shield where it needed Paul's DNA, like Atreides' DNA to open. So, like, I don't know if they got those other lasers and stuff from that stash, they must not have been behind that protective barrier like the nukes are. But yeah,
Right.
they don't really say. But man, those lasers, man, they're good weapons. I gotta say, I was kind of surprised when they started like, you know, saying they had nukes for some reason. Like, I know they're like well into the future, and of course, like nuclear weapons would exist, but for some reason, that like I was still kind of surprised that they're gonna bust out nukes. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
um. So yeah, Gurney takes them to where the nukes were hidden, and they were basically hidden in plain sight. But like I said, they take Paul's DNA to unlock, so they were still basically secure.
Yeah.
Um, so now Fade arrives on Arrakis. He forces Rabin to kiss his foot, and the Baron also tells Rabin that, like, this is your last chance. Like,
Mhm.
you're on thin ice.
It turns out they're both brothers, Fade and Rabin.
Yeah, they're either brothers or cousins. I forget. They're related in some way.
Mhm.
So now Paul has a vision of Chani on a hillside dying after a bomb blast, and like he sees like her radiated like corpse,
Yeah.
basically. So Paul like wakes up, but he sees Chani on that hillside, so he runs to her, and they basically see that Fade is bombing their sacred water pond, like where that was,
Yeah.
and we see like
And they bombed the shit out of it. Like they brought some new weaponry for that one.
right, yeah,
There's artillery.
yeah, they're using like just like high powered artillery and just like bombarding that cave, and we see like the like rocks falling in the sacred pond and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so Fade's men find a lone survivor, and he burns her to death. And like she won't, I forget because he's like they're like she won't talk, and he's like she doesn't need to. I know what I need, but to know, but I think he basically just knows that like they're safe to start up spice production in the north again.
Mhm.
Um, um, okay, so now in the south with Jessica, she asks a woman there where the water of life comes from, the blue liquid, the poison. So the
Mhm.
woman catches a baby sandworm and drowns it in a pond, and this causes um, the she's able to basically take the blue liquid from the baby sandworm after she drowns it in the pond. Yeah.
I was a little surprised by this because I feel like the sandworms were like almost sacred to them, right? So like at some point, somebody before must have done this to teach them how to do it. So it just seemed weird that they would do that to the sandworms.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where on one hand it does seem like they're somewhat sacred to them, but like
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe way back when like somebody found this blue liquid and maybe the blue liquid is also sacred to them, but yeah, I don't
Yeah.
it's hard telling. Yeah, I don't know. She tells the woman that eventually a man will show up and want to do the trial with the blue water, and she's like, "That's not allowed." But Jessica uses the voice on her and tells her to do it.
Mhm.
I think Star Wars had many influences, and I think Dune was a big one. And so I'm wondering if
Yeah.
like that's where the Jedi mind trick came from, is like the Dune voice.
It could be. I didn't know which one came out first, but I'm guessing Dune was like written way before Star Wars came
I
out.
believe
So
so. Yeah, yeah.
okay.
Um, so Paul has another vision, which convinces him that he must travel south and drink the poison water of life. Paul is uneasy about going, but Chani assures him that she will love him as long as he doesn't change who he is, which seemed like some foreshadowing.
Right. Yeah.
But so we get the scene where they all head south on different sandworms.
Mhm.
Um, so Paul walks into the sacred building and he takes a drink of the poison water. Chani is horrified that Paul appears to be dead. Jessica says he isn't dead. His vital signs are just so low that they are undetectable. So
Mhm.
apparently, a part of the prophecy is it says that a drink from a desert spring would save the Messiah. So, of course, Chani, like her name means desert spring. So, like, she
Yeah.
takes one of her tears, mixes it with more of the poison, which I thought was
Right.
a little weird. Like, I thought it would have been smarter if like she just the tears would have worked, because it's like, well, now you're mixing
Right.
it with more poison. I don't know how much that's going to
Just
help him.
doubling down on the dosage there.
Right.
And
But she does.
he's already like pretty bad condition.
But she
Yeah.
does. She mixes it with the poison, puts it in his mouth, and it magically brings him
He
back to
gets
life.
right up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so when Paul is revived, Stilgar and like the other fundamentalists that are in that room now, they're basically fully convinced. Oh yeah, this guy
Oh yeah.
is the Messiah. I mean, I
Because men are supposed to die. Men are supposed to die when they drink it. They don't survive that.
right,
So
right. So Chani's pissed off. She exits the room. So Paul reveals to Jessica that he saw a vision of his older, like his sister, but like older. And
hmm
also, like, there was an ocean on Arrakis as well, I believe.
yeah.
Um, I think in that vision, his sister tells him something, but I'll be honest, I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, I don't remember either. It's something about yeah, I'm not sure. I remember her saying that she loves him and he loves her or something like that, but yeah, I think I'm not sure what it was.
But we also find he also finds out in the vision that his mother Jessica was secretly the daughter of Baron Harkonnen.
Yeah.
Like I believe like this because I was a little confused by that scene. So I actually on the internet found that in the books at least, like even Jessica didn't know. Like the Benny
No,
Gesserit.
she says that in the movie too.
Oh, does she?
Yeah, she only found out once she took the blue
Blue
water,
water.
the sacred life water.
Yeah, for some reason, like the Benny Gesserit, like kept it a secret that that's who her
Yeah.
father was. So yeah, basically, Paul then and his unborn sister, half Atreides, half Harkonnen blood.
hmm
So now they hold a large ceremony where the fundamentalists all gather and pray. Chani tries to convince Stilgar that this is nonsense, but like he's in way too deep. Like he's a true believer. She is
hmm
about to make a scene, but Gurney stops her. He's like, "No, that's not going to play in this room." Um, so there are still some in the room that aren't convinced, but now Paul uses his new knowledge that he got from drinking the water to basically convince everyone that he is the Messiah. Like he gives these guys like very specific details about their past. So they're like, oh, he
Yeah.
would only know that if he's the Messiah. So he
Right.
basically convinces this whole room that he's the Messiah.
hmm
Um, so Paul he takes out his father's ring, the House Atreides ring, and I think he's
Yeah.
like, now I'm Duke Paul Muad'Dib Atreides or whatever, you know.
Yeah, he's like
Um,
mixing his cultures, I guess.
yeah, and so he uses his house ring to send a challenge to the Emperor. Um, and we see a short scene where Christopher Walken, like, you know, he gets that message and he like throws it on the ground, and the princess picks it up and reads it.
Now, this was kind of surprising to me that the emperor took this challenge seriously. Because, like, if there was like a rebellion somewhere, like the emperor wouldn't like you know make that his like number one. He wouldn't show up. Basically, he wouldn't put himself in harm's way. I would say.
I think the thing that worries him in the case of Paul is if it
hmm
gets out that he helped the Harkonnens kill House Atreides, like he's screwed.
Right. That's true. Yeah,
So I think it does concern him a little more specifically that Paul's alive and is
I
challenging
get
him.
that.
So, so yeah, the Emperor shows up to Arrakis. And speaking of the whole Emperor's secret thing, Baron Harkonnen puts out a call to the other houses as an insurance policy to basically, like, you know, if the Emperor pulls something, he's going to spill the tea and let him know, hey, the Emperor like helped us kill House Atreides, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, doesn't that make Harkonnens look bad too? Like, is it like pulling a gun on both of yourselves?
That I don't know because like we really don't know much about all the other houses.
Yeah,
Um,
what the rules
yeah,
are?
what the rules are, like, yeah, like I don't know if it would put the Harkonnens in like a worse or better light if the other houses knew what happened.
Yeah.
So we get a scene where the Baron Fade and Rabin, they all kneel before the Emperor. And I forget the Emperor's words here exactly, but he's not happy with them. And like there's this like device that helps the Baron to be able to walk, and he basically has one of his guys like sever the cord off of that. So like the Baron, it causes the Baron to basically drop, and he has to
Mhm.
like just crawl on the floor basically.
Yeah.
Um, um, so at about that time, like they hear a commotion on the outside, that they're being attacked.
Mhm.
So Stilgar, he notes that yet like Paul's challenge to the Emperor worked as a trap to lure him there.
Yeah.
And so they go over their plan here. They basically have a three-pronged attack plan. So Stilgar's team is gonna they attack the base, riding the sandworms, and so they're able to basically take out like a lot of the bad guys, like heavy artillery and stuff.
Yeah.
Basically, like once I learned that they can ride the worms, I'm kind of like, why weren't you guys doing this more like all along?
Yeah, these worms are huge. They could destroy a whole ship, I feel like. They're
Yeah, I
massive.
feel like even in I mean, the first movie they did kind of show how like they have spotters that watch the sand processors, and like if a worm gets too close, they'll go and pick up the spice harvester. But a part of me is like, they still could have messed up a lot of the army guys. They still could have messed up like some of their facilities that are just maybe on the ground unshielded.
Yeah.
Uh, so I don't know, but yeah, once I learned that like, oh, they can seemingly easily ride these sandworms, I'm like, that's pretty powerful. I think you guys could have done more than you were.
Should just use them. So before this scene, they do show that Paul, like, he says there's many ways that it's almost like a Doctor Strange scene in Infinity War, where he sees like a vision of they could lose in several different styles. There's several ways paths to losing, but he said that he found a way to win. And so this is how he comes up with a strategy of how to attack at this point, I think.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. He's like, I see this like narrow path to victory,
Yeah.
and I believe it briefly shows like a him with like a sword in his hand, which it'll reference later in his fight with Fade.
Hmm.
But yeah, they have a three-pronged attack. So Stilgar's team attacks the base riding the worms, and they wreck shop. Chani's team attacks on foot from the side, and they take out a bunch of guys. And then finally, Paul and the fundamentalist army, they attack head on. And so they
Hmm.
basically, it's a pretty one-sided fight. Like Paul's team is just like wrecking shop.
Yeah, yeah, easy
Yeah.
victory. Yeah.
So Paul's team eventually do breach into the throne room where the emperor is. Paul walks up to the Baron, who's like, he's on the floor, like trying to like almost climb up to where the emperor was sitting on the throne.
What was that going to do for him? I don't
Yeah, it's
understand. Like,
not
what
like if he made it to the
you don't just
throne,
sit
he would
there,
magically be emperor. I don't think
right?
it's not like musical
So he looks
chairs.
really, yeah, he looks really pathetic in this situation right here.
So yeah, Paul basically walks up to him. He refers to him as grandfather now that he knows that, and he basically,
Yeah.
stabs and kills him. And I think he has a
Hmm.
line like, let the desert take him. And eventually they do like throw him out in the desert, and you see like ants covering his dead body.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so Paul takes the emperor and the others in the room prisoner. Outside, we see the rest of the Harkonnen are defeated. And I forgot to set this up, but like Gurney, he was really pissed off at Rabin because like Rabin like scarred his face, and I think killed a bunch of House Atreides members.
Yeah.
So he gets his revenge here. Gurney kills Rabin. So back inside, Paul tells Chani once more that he will love her as long as he breathes. He tells Gurney to tell the other houses, because they have shown up also. He just says, tell
Hmm.
the other houses that if they act against him, that he will use a nuclear weapon on the spice fields, just completely nuke the spice fields.
Hmm.
Paul tells the emperor that he will take the princess's hand in marriage and rule. And we can see like this visibly pisses off Chani, right? Because
Yeah, yeah, for
yeah.
sure, naturally.
The emperor tells Paul that he killed his father because his father led with his heart and that he was weak. Um, Paul tells,
Which seemed kind of like a BS reason to kill somebody. Like, give like was he like combative? Like, was he rebellious? Like, was it because he was like leading with his heart because he was not doing what you wanted? Like, did he say that? Like, he was not doing what he wanted?
well, I wonder about that too because so number one in the first movie, like the Harkonnen at first control Arrakis, and then the Emperor
Hmm.
takes them off of Arrakis, and he puts House Atreides onto Arrakis, and then we find out specifically um, to eventually kill them. And
Yeah,
I remember at the beginning of this movie when Florence Pugh's princess character is narrating, she even mentions that like after the deed was done, like the Emperor seemed unemotional, like he didn't necessarily seem happy about it, and
right.
so I was curious about that too, like what the backstory is exactly with the Emperor and Paul's father, and what led
She
him.
even said
Yeah,
she even says that Paul's father was like a son to the emperor at some point. So
yeah, and so it seemed contradictory
yeah,
because that line by her made it seem like the Emperor like liked Paul's
had a soft spot
father,
for
yeah, had a
him.
soft spot for him,
Yeah,
and then this line here made it seem like he kind of disdained him and thought he was a weakling. So
right.
I, yeah, I'm a little confused on that as well. I don't know exactly what their history is, but also it
Yeah.
seems like the Bene Gesserit are the ones that can use their political power to convince the Emperor to kill Paul's father. So I'm like, did the
Maybe
Emperor?
they use the force on him, like that voice or something.
That's an interesting theory. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, Paul he's pissed off now, so he tells the Emperor to face him or choose a champion. And Fade's right there, so Vade volunteers to be the Emperor's champion.
Yeah.
Gurney wants to be Paul's champion, but Paul insists on fighting Fade himself. So Paul and
Hmm.
Fade get into a fight. Paul ends up getting stabbed. It doesn't look real good for him, but he toughs it out, and he still ends up beating Fade, stabbing Fade. And this is what I was talking about. When he stabs Fade, it kind of gives that short glimpse of like the stab, and we're like, and you're kind of like, oh, I saw that before when he was saying
Hmm.
like, oh, I see a narrow pathway to victory. It showed that same like him with the sword in his hand or knife in his hand.
Yeah.
You know. Paul wants to kill the emperor, but the princess says if he spares him, that she will willingly marry him. So he basically just makes the emperor like bow down and kiss his ring.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of like he could have killed him. It doesn't matter if she willingly marries him; she still has to marry him anyway.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Gurney says the other houses refuse to acknowledge Paul as the new emperor. Stilgar asks what they should do, and he says, "Lead them to paradise," which is something that they set up earlier. Which because I think that's the thing. Like
Hmm.
the Messiah will lead everyone to paradise. I believe is like a
Right.
line they referenced earlier. So this
Mhm.
goes back to that. So this will presumably kick off the holy war that he saw in his visions.
Yeah.
And basically, as the war starts, and like the other houses start going to war and everything,
Hmm.
we end the movie seeing a pissed off and determined Chani preparing to catch a ride on a worm.
Yeah.
Um, and I gotta say that made me be like, yeah, I'm ready for Dune Part Three. Like, I want to see
Yeah.
where her character goes.
I'm
Um,
looking forward to it. Yeah. Huge change from the first one for sure. My reaction. Yeah.
you know, part of me like I do like the Breaking Bad kind of thing where like we do see Lady Jessica and Paul like kind of turning to the dark side, so to speak. But a
Yeah.
part of me kind of wishes the blue water wasn't involved because that almost gives them more of an out, like
Yeah.
an ambiguity of like, is it just the water corrupting them, or was this in them all along, kind of thing, you know? And I think it would almost be
Well,
more interesting if he got corrupted on his own. Um, like he took the power out of desperation, but then he almost got drunk on it, you know? I don't know.
right. Well, I mean, the mother does explain at the beginning, like before she drinks the water, that like it's difficult. It's a difficult process to handle all those centuries of memories and stuff, and it can like alter you to some extent. So it could just be that like all that knowledge and maybe with that knowledge you get like a new perspective, right? And so that's what kind of changes them. Like they have more pathways of thinking. Like they can explore like, you know, maybe I don't want to go the noble route. Maybe this is the more efficient route. You know, like you know, just like it opens up their train of, you know, they can figure out more things. Like they can act on different ideas now.
You know, that would be an interesting thing to explore too. If it's like this leads them to do horrific things, but like
Yeah,
in the end, like maybe it would be better than.
the ends justify the means, sort of thing.
Yeah, it's almost like this is maybe a bad example, and it's not something I really believe. But like, there's this horrible like genocide right now going on with the whole Israel Palestine thing.
Yeah,
Well, let's say let like Israel like totally takes over Gaza or whatever, but this leads
hmm
to peace. Like, like, and let's say like we could like let's say if they just kept on the track they've been on forever, like ultimately there would be more death than like a lot of death
hmm
right now in an eventual peace because like Israel won
right.
out. Like it's
Yeah,
kind of like a horrific thing to think about, but it's something that could
yeah.
possibly be true. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah, like for any of us, like, you know, it's not a path anybody wants to take,
Right.
but in his mind, he might have this clarity of thought, like this foresight where it just makes sense to do that because he knows what's going to happen. So, yeah, I could see that.
But again, that's one of the reasons I like this movie is because it explores those kind of themes, and
Yeah.
you know they're complicated, right? And you just don't. It's rare to get a movie like this where you get these like really cool cinematic visuals,
hmm
but also just a lot of food for thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, AJ, any final thoughts or maybe things I missed in my notes that you'd like to touch on before we give our final score?
No, I think we covered it pretty well.
All right. So yeah, AJ, what would you give this on a scale of 1 to 10?
It's up there. I think I'm going to go with an 8.5, not a clear 9, just because mm, I don't know. I think there's maybe they'll be even better in the third one. Who knows? So yeah, maybe an 8.5.
Yeah, I was kind of waffling between an 8 and an 8.5, but I think, you know, talking it out
Mhm,
with you, I think I kind of reminded me myself of like a lot of things I really did like about this movie. So yeah, I think I'm going to go with
mhm.
an 8.5 as well. I think this was really solid. You know, like I said, I think my only thing is I after watching, I'm like, this is epic, but I don't know if I was ever like really emotionally involved, like just because like
Right.
most of the characters are kind of like
Cold. Yeah.
a little bit cold, yeah. Interesting, very
Mhm,
interesting characters, but
yeah.
cold in a way, yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, everybody, like if you have not seen Dune Part Two, I highly recommend seeing it in theaters. I don't think many people will be disappointed. Um, All right. Well, AJ, I had fun going over the film with you. I think it was pretty interesting film. Yeah.
Yeah, big time.
So yeah, everybody, we thank you very much for watching. If you will, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Give us thumbs up, positive reviews, all that good stuff. If you like, you can follow me over on Twitter/X at Zach Jones Live. That's ZachJonesLive. But that's going to do it for all of our shenanigans and poppycock this week. Please, please, please tune in again next week. Bye, guys.
Take care.